So I had a child when I was 16, so I was kind of just thrown into poverty with no experience on how to work the system or how to get my needs met. My health deteriorated pretty fast. I wasn't able to eat properly. I spent a lot of time alone. It was very isolating. Even at the bank, as soon as they saw I was on social assistance, it was like a completely different, um, like they would just change the way they spoke to me and like, okay, you can wait kind of thing. Dealing with the social services was horrible. Because of my age, I felt like I was a little bit targeted from Children's Aid. They would, they were just constantly checking up on me and like, you can't do this, you're not capable. And then just people my age, I wasn't able to go out. I didn't have the nicest clothes. I couldn't afford the nicest stuff. So I was just kind of pushed to the side. Yeah, again, just very isolating.
Did you?
Yeah. I also work as a cook at Martha's Table. So I see a lot of different people in different situations. And I think most of them and myself feel unworthy. I don't know if that's the right word, but just like we're kind of on the fringe of society. We're not as good as everybody else, and it makes you just feel degraded. And I think that's how a lot of people see themselves. Not necessarily that is reality of how they're treated, but that's how you feel. You just feel not good enough, and I think that maybe feeling like that makes other people see you like that. So it's like a little snowball effect. Being very young and having a baby on your hip and you cash in a welfare check or something, people just like, another one of those people, they just instantly put you in a category, whether they don't need to know or they don't even know anything else about you, but you're just all of a sudden one of those people. And this has been going on for a very long time. People have just, as soon as there's someone in need of welfare assistance, and a lot of people have abused the system, but it kind of creates this hatred towards them, maybe because people don't work and they're working really hard, which is frustrating. And they think, oh, they have the easy way out or something, but it's not, and it's definitely not the easy way out. And many people wish they could work. And also, when you feel like you're not good enough, you have no self-confidence. If you're not good enough, why are you going to apply for this job that says you need to be able to do this, this, and that? And you go, well, can I do that? Oh, I don't think I can do that. So you just don't do it, and you just stay where you are, and that can go on for years, and then people disrespect that.
Working with girls in poverty involves difficulties in many different aspects of their lives. So, for example, poverty often leads to stress in parents, and when parents are in a state of stress, it puts their children in a state of stress as well, which leads to some mental health struggles in terms of anxiety and depression, feeling out of control. So from a mental health aspect, it certainly has some significant impacts, but also impacts of physical health as well. So food insecurity, for example, not being able to access a healthy meal. And at a more gender-specific level, girls in poverty sometimes don't have the same information or access to things like birth control that other girls may have. And that can also lead to a great deal of stressors and then again, more mental health complications.
Too, which like a lot of girls use things like birth control to control their periods, right? And that may not be accessible because we don't have, they may not have access to the medications to do that kind of thing. And so that, lots of girls use that as a means to sort of help things along a little bit more smoothly. And if you don't have a pharmacare or a drug plan, then you don't necessarily have access to those things either, right? Which has many consequences, but that's one of them that a lot of people may not think of, right?
It's really easy to lay a blame game on poverty, and you really do need to understand that there are so many layers to poverty. One is lack of education. One is that it's an ongoing cycle in many families. So it could be 2, 3, 4 generations of families that have been in this cycle of poverty, and trying to break out of a cycle of poverty is a really, really tough struggle.
There are a lot of things that sort of are tied into this issue that it's hard, and if kids don't have someone to help guide them and support them and help them see how these barriers can be overcome, then then they re-enter that cycle, and it's hard to break out of.
Yeah.
I think it's down to how you look at someone. When you talk to someone, get down on their level, and they're just another person. So if you just treat them like they're just another person, that's usually good enough for them, and that brings them over
As
there.
individuals, I think one of the most important things is actually maintaining a non-judgmental stance. Oftentimes, we like to attribute things like teen pregnancy to individual choices, when sometimes it has nothing to do with choices at all. It has to do with limited access to the necessary supports. So as individuals, being non-judgmental and supportive, and being able to help the person navigate the complicated system from a government level or policy level or at agency level. What we want to do is make sure that healthcare, and mental health care specifically, is accessible. And that means being able to provide low cost or free mental health services, but also making sure that people are aware of those services. So there needs to be some outreach and having it be in physical locations that are accessible.
Some of our people, have lived on the streets, have had to do some things just to eat, to get a good place to sleep, get shelter, get a shower, get a meal, that are questionable and make them feel like less of a person. And I think anybody would make those decisions if they were in that circumstance. So the more we can normalize that and say, it's not you, it's this up system. Sorry. It's really broken. It has nothing to do with the person, it's the system. This doesn't define who I am. This doesn't mean that I'm a bad person. This is just the hand I've been given, and there's not really much options here. So we need to just treat people like they're better than the situation they're in. We need to value their opinions and their choices, and we need to not keep clawing back money from all these services that are out there to help people. We pay one of the highest taxes in the world, and it doesn't really go anywhere. It doesn't do much for the people in these circumstances. I think voting is important. Anyone who is just all for business is not the right one. They might have great ideas, but it needs to be someone who's going to look out for the small guy, the guy who has nothing. If we take care of our impoverished people and our people with disabilities and mental health issues, that will make us greater as a nation. Instead, we just take care of the people on top who don't need help. A lot of people that are homeless, they rely on Martha's Table and other places in the community for their meals, and if they weren't there, they wouldn't eat. So I think definitely donating time. We need a lot of volunteers. Time, money, food, anything like that to your local churches and places like Martha's Table. There's St. Vincent de Paul, there's St. George's Church, there's a bunch of places that could really use volunteers and donations. That keeps them going, that keeps people fed, that keeps them clothed. They might be able to get help with the bill so that they're not evicted from their place or anything like that. You do what you can when you can, and right there, that's good enough. Yeah. A lot of girls get into relationships without understanding themselves, understanding their partner, and all of a sudden they're in a situation that could easily turn sour, could land them in poverty. Babies make women poor. Having children makes women poor if they're not established properly, and I think our sex ed courses are lacking so much. It needs to be a relationship course, an understanding of yourself, what you want, what you need, what you don't want.
Sure. In terms of specific practices, oftentimes it's arming young girls and young women with the information they need, with skills to advocate for themselves and to advocate for what they need. So in Kingston, young people have access to the Maltby Centre, which provides care for very young children all the way through to late adolescence, and it also provides support for their parents. There's also for older teens and youth, there's the Resolve Center, which I think used to be K3C Counseling, and there's Frontenac Mental Health, which may have changed names as well. There are sexual assault clinics that can provide services depending on what the person is looking for as well.
There are some wonderful programs here, and a lot of people are helped through them, but it's not where it needs to be.
We had a breakfast program that fed every single kid in the morning at QE, like every single kid in the school. And so I would have breakfast in my class. I'd have boxes of Nutri-Grain bars. And on weekends, I would have kids who would steal boxes and shove them in their knapsacks to take home on the weekend. And I would just turn a blind eye to that. And I'd think, wow, like, people are stealing from our breakfast program because they don't have food to eat on the weekend.
A really different experience, actually, because I myself actually grew up quite with not a lot of money. We grew up, my mom was on social assistance. She was a single mom with 2 kids. She went back to school by herself. We went to the food bank every month to get our food. We relied on people to help us out at Christmas time. Like, we didn't have a lot. And so, but then my mom started teaching when I was 11. So by then we started coming out of it, but she worked in the North End, actually, at Rideau Heights Public School. So I sort of saw it through that lens. I'd gone from myself being a kid living definitely below the poverty line, but seeing that, like, we had it pretty bad, but there were a lot of kids that had it quite a lot worse than we did. And relatively speaking, we were actually quite fortunate. And so it was kind of a weird, surreal experience to have at a really young age where, you know, I grew up not at all feeling sorry for myself. I had a really wonderful childhood. But then to see that there were people out there that had even less than us was really eye-opening, and it really, like, I grew up really appreciating what we did have and realizing that this was a problem that was quite a lot bigger than my own experience had sort of suggested that it was. Because the actual survival needs are so high, like, we need to make sure that, or they need to make sure that they have housing, they need to make sure they have food, they need to make sure that they can get to school, or they can have clothes, or pay the bills, or whatever, that things like mental health care and physical health care become really secondary, and it is hard to treat those things like mental health and physical health issues because they're just not the main problem. And so those issues tend to be quite prevalent too, which also play into the things we were talking about earlier, like self-esteem and the confidence to try and break cycles. And so those things are often not a priority, right? Or they're not spoken about, or I just think it's an important sort of factor to remember when it comes to poverty, that, like, physical and mental health are really important. And they're not always priorities when you're fighting to survive.
Time is such a huge barrier. So when a young person is working 2 jobs to help the family finances, and the parent is working 2 jobs, and still they're not being able to make ends meet, you know, being able to find the time to go talk to someone for an hour a week, it feels kind of like a luxury, and actually in many cases it is a luxury. And being able to have transportation to get to these appointments, there are many, many barriers to accessing healthcare, unfortunately, that I think need to be addressed at a policy level.
I think empathy is really, like,
Yeah.
we are sort of quick to impose what we view as being the solution, but also quick to impose what we see as being the problem. And we have to work really hard to see what the real barriers are for people, and think about, well, if I had those same barriers, like, where would I be? And, you know, I consider myself to be so fortunate because for a large chunk of my childhood I had those barriers, but I also had a parent who went to university and who was in university, and, you know, someone who, I don't know, I think we were just a really resilient, lucky family, to be honest. When I look back on, my mom worked super hard, and we were able to get out of it, but we were also in situational poverty. It wasn't cyclical poverty, and it was the result of some life events, right? And so that cycle wasn't there, and I think it was easier for someone like my mom, who already had a university degree, to break out of that poverty, where, you know, if she hadn't, and she was young and she didn't have a lot of work experience, like, I think my life would have been super, super different, right? And so I think we have to work really hard to see where the real barriers are, and be empathetic and understand that if we had those same barriers, like, our life could be very different, and that, you know, living in a certain postal code, or having a middle-class parents, or parents who just went to school, or who believe in school, like, those are huge privileges that I think we often take for granted. And I think it's really important to try to recognize that and to work to be empathetic. I think that's the big one. So it's hard because I think we really need to listen to the communities and talk to the people who are living in this situation to work together to find the solutions, because a lot of the times what we see as being the problems may not be the primary problem. Like, it may be a problem, like obviously a winter coat is a really nice thing to have, but if you don't have shoes and there's 3 feet of snow, then that's the priority, right? Because you're going to get frostbite.
Yeah.
So, you know, you have kids walking to school in running
Or
shoes
if
that
your
have
feet's
their
gonna get cut
toes
off.
poking, right?
Right.
Like, so there just might not be a simple solution, and we, as people who are more fortunate in life, we love a simple solution, and it's hard to accept that that solution might not be as obvious as we want it to be, and it may not be as easy as donating cans or buying a winter coat. It involves really cooperating with communities and doing sort of grassroots work to figure out what the needs are and how to best serve them.
Yeah, there
Right?
are other options out there, right? Like, your postal code is not going to determine your destiny. It doesn't have to determine your destiny.